Thanks for coming. We have a few people that are hopefully going to be logged in on the Zoom, so we want to get this thing started on, well, we should get started on time anyway. But this is the first time we've Zoomed anything, and like it's a live thing, so people can ask questions. So he'll hopefully get notice of us somehow, and if there's somebody asks a question, then we'll pass it on to you.
Okay.
But anybody has questions as we're going along, that's what this is for. It's a workshop. It's not, you know, a lecture. So if you have any questions at all about this, Bob's just a friend of mine. He's not like a professional gardener, like
No.
you know, always been a farmer, although he did have a ranch for a while, so I didn't realize that. But he just, my wife has talked to him before and seen his backyard when she was visiting with his wife. And just, how many of these do you have, the boxes?
I think there's 32.
Yeah.
I lose track.
That's a lot of tomatoes. So, you know, anyway. So it was just one way of doing it. I think he's going to talk about several different ways of gardening in Arizona, but this is one I'm definitely going to look at. So just again, if you have questions, that's what he's here for. So let's go ahead. It's
Okay.
Bob Bunker.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, right. And Jamin, my wife dearly misses your children. So anyway, it's great to be with you today. I thoroughly enjoy gardening. As Dale mentioned, I'm not a master gardener, but I do enjoy the successes. And I have to admit, even over the last 10 years, as I've endeavored to grow vegetables and herbs and things of that nature, there have been and continue to be some frustrations sometimes. So what I did is put together a little presentation, basically for those of you that have not done any gardening or haven't done much. We'll do some of the introductory, and then we'll do some specifics. And, you know, if you have any questions, hopefully I can answer them. If not, one of the things that has evolved from when I originally started gardening is the internet. Certainly, there is a lot of things on YouTube that give information, a lot of things on the internet. As with the internet, you'll find conflicting suggestions or ways of doing things. So sometimes it's really trial and error on your part. I've sort of perfected at least how I do it, to the extent that most of the time I'm pretty successful. So you really, before you even start gardening, you really need to consider the time constraints and whether you want to use your time in this way. Watering, clearly you're going to, particularly here in Maricopa, you know, as we get towards the summer, you're going to definitely need to be consistent in your watering. You don't want to overwater and you don't want to underwater, which can be a challenge based on some ways of gardening. Pests are a problem regardless of how diligent you are. Sometimes you'll inherit them if you buy plant starts from the nurseries. Sometimes they just show up. And so you have to be diligent in terms of looking at, and it really should be on virtually a daily basis, that you're taking a look at your plants and making sure that that there's nothing that, and sometimes, you know, you may want to even use some kind of there's a lot of different things on the market to try and control or kill the pests. Trimming, staking, depending on the plants that you're growing, may need that. Certainly wouldn't be on a daily basis. And then, of course, your planting. Now, since you're here, you're probably affiliated with the Meikle group, and so money probably is not a problem. But oh, you're laughing. Better not be. But you know, you take a look at some of the things you're going to have to. Even if you have in-ground gardening, you're going to want to add some probably some soil amendments to it. You've got your fertilizers that you're going to need to use, whether you want to do plants from seeds or whether you want the transplants. And I was mentioning a little while ago, I think probably, at least over the last several years, my tomatoes have cost probably about $10 a pound. I think now with inflation, it may go up to like $15 a pound. So you're really not going to obviously save any money by gardening a small garden, but you are going to get a lot of enjoyment. And I think sometimes I think it's psychological, but I think it tastes a lot better when you've grown it yourself and you know whether you've used organic fertilizers or whether you've used chemical fertilizers, whatever you want to accomplish. As with real estate, location, location, location is extremely important. And you really need a good 6 to 8 hours a day of sun. So you need to determine where the best place to place your garden so that you get a consistent amount of sun. And of course, we're blessed here in Phoenix area that we get a lot of sun. The next thing you're going to want to know is, are you going to put your garden in the ground? In other words, you're going to kind of plow up a certain area and plant either seeds or transplants, or are you going to put it in a container? If you're just going to have like one tomato plant or a couple in a smaller container that you set on your porch or in the backyard somewhere, or are you going to do something with a larger container, such as square foot gardening, which we'll talk about a little bit, or an Earthbox, or some other kind of container. But you really need to decide, I think, in advance, and you can obviously increase or decrease based on that. The square foot gardening is a concept that was developed several years ago. And what that is you take and identify a square, whether it's a 4x4, a 6x6, so you end up like with a 4x4, you're going to have 16 square feet within your container. And what you do is then you box off square feet, 1 square feet. And so you end up with, in the example, 16 squares. And there's a method to how many plants, which type of plant you put in a square. In other words, a tomato plant would just go in 1 square because of the size that it would grow. And other things, smaller plants, you might have 6 or 7 that are placed in it. If you're interested in that particular method of gardening, you can go on the internet and download an actual, it shows you the plants and the number you can put in each square foot. So that's the planting structure. The medium is interesting. So you've got either a buildup structure or in the ground, but at least so you can contain the medium. So it's composed of equal parts of peat moss, compost, and vermiculite. Now, if you're not familiar with vermiculite, it really provides so the soil doesn't clump and go together, but keeps it lighter. The nice thing about the square foot gardening, I think, is that it gives you a structure and a way. And each year after the growing season, you don't have to replace the vermiculite or the peat moss, but they do recommend that you replace the compost. So that provides the nutrient value under this program. what I started out doing, our home has a retaining wall that runs in the back of this area, probably about, I don't know, 8 feet tall or so. And then coming out, there's another kind of like small brick wall. So what I did is using the square foot method, squared off and it runs quite a ways. And so I planted a lot of various things, being kind of naive to the whole thing. Had some great successes, had beets come up, I had corn, I had just all kinds of different things. I was a little overexcited, I think, in terms of getting all this great vegetables. But what I quickly found out is that because our home sits right at the base of a mountain, and we've got a lot of interesting animals that come down. We've got anything from rabbits are, of course, probably so plentiful, even though I tried initially to block off the gate in various places they can sneak under. But they would come in and kind of destroy very quickly some of the things. I had a beautiful beet garden going. I mean, really beautiful. Came home one day, gone. I mean, there was all the dig up marks and things. So what I finally decided to do with the garden on that side is plant onions, garlic, and I also planted some potatoes, and I had a good crop the first time until I suppose the rabbits found the leaves and stuff on top. But in any event, so I've kind of limited myself just because of and I think a lot of the lizards and the smaller creatures also love to chomp on some of the leaves and things. So I've kind of found that I can successfully grow the onions and garlic and things like that. And what's nice is you don't have to harvest them all at once, and they maintain for quite a long period of time. So if my wife is cooking something and she needs a couple of onions, you just go out and pull it, and it's really nice and handy to have rather than buying a lot of stuff at the market. This is just another example. And the reason I segregated a path on each of these is because it went back probably about 4 or 5 feet, is so I could walk back and be able to attend to plants and things. This happens to be an artichoke plant that I was surprised. I had never grown one before, and it turned out pretty well. So that kind of brings us to the Earthbox. That's a trade name for this container, which I was introduced to by an individual who had had great success with it. And it made a lot of sense to me. My wife doesn't want me to have a garden that she can see out of the house. She wants to see the pool, and she wants to see, we've got couple levels of retaining walls with plants and stuff. So she wanted to kind of keep that pristine, so to speak. So I was relegated to the other side of the house, which fortunately has a good amount of sun every day. And so what I did is I decided to use the Earthbox, and I tried it. I bought 5 of them originally, thinking that would be enough. And as I indicated, I subsequently expanded them to about 32 because I enjoyed doing it so much. Always surprised my wife for a couple of years when she'd come home and there'd be a UPS package on the doorstep with 5 of these. But she's very forgiving. So what this is, as you can see, it's a container box, and there's a screen here which fits over here. And the purpose of the screen is to put the growing medium on top of the screen so it doesn't go down, because what you're going to do is you've got a fill tube here. So you're going to fill this with water, and it holds about 3 gallons of water when you have full. And then if you put more than 3 gallons in, it will start, oops, I got it wrong. Yeah. It'll start running out this hole here. So it doesn't, it doesn't fill up. So what happens is with the medium on there, the water actually, and on both of these sides, it goes all the way down into the water so that the growing medium goes down on each of those sides. And what happens is the water wicks up through and basically basically waters keeps the moisture of the growing medium. So the real advantage on that is that you can't overwater or underwater, because it's just going to wick up the amount that it needs. Whereas square foot gardening, you're going to have to sort of make sure that you don't overwater or underwater, because both are equally difficult for the plants. The other thing then, once you've got it up to about 2 inches of height there with the growing medium, then you put about a 1 pound of dolomite on and spread it and work it into the medium. And the reason for the dolomite is it contains primarily calcium, but also magnesium. And calcium is very important to the plants, particularly tomato plants and other plants. So that's an important ingredient. So you mix that into the growing medium, and then put another layer or so of medium on top of that, and then you want to take about 1 pound of, if you're using chemical fertilizer, and it equals about 1 cup, you want to make for the Earthbox. If you're growing tomatoes, you're going to place 1 or 2 of them, but 1 on each side. And there's a list here of where you place the plants and where you place the fertilizers. And we can make copies if you're interested. You can go on the internet on Earthbox and find that. But you basically just make a trough, and if we were doing tomatoes in this, we would have 1 on each side here, and then
Do they come any bigger than that?
no. Well,
Because tomato plants, I mean, I have 2 at home.
yeah.
They get pretty big.
Well, and we'll get into that. That's an important point, depending on the type of tomato plant that you grow. So once you've got all of that, your fertilizer in and your medium, then this is just an example of mine. What you do is then put the, you can buy what I call a rain cap, but basically it's a cap that fits directly on this and has a little elasticity to it, so it holds it on. And I did that for several years, but then I got annoyed paying a couple of bucks for each of the rain caps, and you could use it for a couple of plantings, but after that it pretty well deteriorated. So what I did is I first of all, I got Mylar, but then that broke down pretty quickly because of the UV rays and the sun and all that. So I went and I bought rolls on the internet. I bought rolls of plastic, which have worked really well. So that goes on, and the reason, and then I just clip it on with, the regular paper clips.
How many mil thick is that?
I don't remember, but you want a decent, thickness. Otherwise, it's gonna deteriorate pretty quickly. The reason for it is to really try and at least you can't eliminate evaporation, but it does contain it. So there's a little bit of benefit there, I think, in terms of.
Pertaining to the watering, so you can't overwater or underwater.
But as long as you keep water in the reservoir.
So you just fill it up every so often. And then
Yeah,
you
and
feel for that. When it starts to leak out.
exactly. Now, if we're going to be gone for a week or so, then I've set up, and I don't have it shown in here, but I've got like a drip system on a timer. And so I just put it in there. And the only problem with that is that, obviously all of the earth boxes don't need the same amount of additional water. And so you do lose some that the overflow will fall out. There is a system, I haven't tried it, that the Earthbox company has developed, which is based on, I guess, pressure that will automatically fill up to the amount that you need. But I'm usually around, and at least in the last several years, we haven't done a whole lot of traveling. But the other thing to point out, and this worked well, but then, I still had the animals. I still had, people, particularly the birds. If I grew a lot of tomatoes, so frustrating to have them just start to turn pink, and then that bird comes and pecks away at it. Doesn't destroy the whole tomato, although my wife refuses to use any of it if it's got a bird hole in it. So what I started doing was I would, if it just sort of started to turn pink, I'd pick them, take them in the house, wrap them in paper, put it in a box, put an apple in. Supposedly ethylene gas helps the ripening process. And it worked very well, except it was kind of a pain to do it that way. So what I decided to do, and I'm not a builder, but decided I'd construct a rather simple containment. And so what I did is I had a kind of a foundation of cinder block, and then I glued to the cinder block wood, and then I stapled chicken wire going up about 2 feet to try and at least eliminate the rabbits, and then bird netting over the top. And this was about 6 feet tall and about 15, 16 feet long. And I created a door, and all of it out of PVC, and I used pretty much the whole structure is PVC. And then I used some of the steel rebar to secure, and just put the PVC over it. There's a planting guide that, I don't know why it isn't Arizona State, but U of A developed, and it's for Maricopa. So it really is a valuable resource, and I've used this quite a bit. The nice thing about it is it has the entire year laid out, and shows what time of the year to plant certain plants. Also whether it's by seed or by transplant. And so that I would definitely recommend that you do. If yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Was this the other?
Yeah, that was the other. Okay. So if we take a look, and I decided just to use tomatoes as an example. I think you'd get bored if we went through all the different vegetables. But the one thing that you need to determine is whether you want determinate or indeterminate tomato plants. The difference being, as it says, determinate, if you've ever seen small tomato plants that don't grow very big, these are called determinants because you sort of determine the size. The indeterminate is probably what you were planning. And that's what I tend to do just because I think I get more yield, and I haven't spent a lot of time with the determinant. So you need to decide again which kind that you want. The important thing when you go to plant if you're using transplant, and kind of backing up, you can grow virtually everything, of course, from seed. I just personally don't have the patience to do that because, I mean, that really, takes a lot of time and effort. And if, like, for example, if you wanted to plant seeds for tomatoes here, you would probably have to plant them in like December if you wanted to plant seeds, and so that you had some transplants a little bit later. And you would probably have to do it in your garage or some structure. And so, but if once you've got either your starts from seed or purchase starts, I just go to Summer Winds. There's a lot of, I like to basically go to kind of the hometown stores rather than the big box. And they tend to have, I usually buy just the little starts. They come in 6-packs. I don't know what I just recently planted 20 tomato plants. And I did them all of these 6-packs. And I think they were, I don't remember, maybe $5. So I think it was less than a buck a plant. But once you remove them, you got to be careful, taking them out of the container. I like to actually cut down, because it's all thin plastic, just cut down the sides of the container and pull them down, and then they easily pull out without destroying the roots. But once you have the plant out, then what you want to do is remove about 2/3 of the leaves. And the reason for this is so that the plant will develop the root structure, additional root structure. And then you want to plant it deeply. So you've clipped the leaves off and set it down really deeply. It'd probably go almost to the bottom, but not totally. And then, like I said, you want at least 2 feet spacing. And if you're doing in-ground, you may want a little more on that.
So where the plant is at ground level, when you buy it, you're putting more of the stock of the plant
Down. Yep. Some of you may have heard of blossom end rot, and that's something that is very frustrating. And if you use the dolomite or you use a calcium supplement, you probably, and you don't over or underwater. From some of the things I've read, the over and underwatering will also create as primary culprit for blossom end root. And what that is, if you haven't seen it, is your tomato will grow and look beautiful, but then on the bottom part of it, it's going to turn kind of black and kind of mushy. And obviously, at least my wife won't cut it off and use the rest of the tomato. And I can go along with that. And then you want to use a balanced fertilizer. The using the Earthbox, they recommend keeping the fertilizer, and when you've bought fertilizer, there's the NPK designation. You want to keep each of those between 5 and I would say 12. You could maybe stretch it to 13, and that seems to work well.
NPK, is that nitrogen?
Phosphorus and potassium.
Oh,
So each of those are important ingredients in the development of the plant. And you'll see that on all of the fertilizer bags. You may see a 0, in which case there's none of phosphorus or potassium. The thing that, and that could be, if you have all those other ingredients in your soil and you don't have enough calcium, then you would or nitrogen, you would want, which is usually what's lacking in the soil. One of the things you can do, particularly if you're doing an in-ground where you're not going to use the square foot medium or the Earthbox, is to maybe purchase a soil tester, and you can get those for $30, $50 or so, or you can send a sample of your soil and have a lab. I don't know what costs, probably $100 or something, but would certainly be important if you're going to have an in-ground garden.
I have a question then about this, because this is the first time I've tried tomatoes in the winter, and I have tomatoes on my plant, and some of them are pretty good size, but they're not turning red. They're eventually splitting.
Yep.
What am I doing wrong?
Well, you're not doing anything wrong. The weather's doing things wrong.
Okay.
Now, my understanding is that what happens is as obviously the tomato has moisture inside of it, and if it gets too hot, it can expand and split the tomato. Now, there may be some other causes that I've had that problem before.
If it was the soil, or if I wasn't watering enough.
No, I don't think so. But you may research it. And I'll do that too.
Okay. What about
Yeah.
water? Our water is horrible.
Yep, it sure is. In fact, I've found that a lot of times if I don't take the nozzle off my hose regularly, it's gonna get crusted on because of all the calcium minerals that are in the water. Regular tap water works just fine.
But don't we have enough calcium and magnesium in our water?
No. At least not in my experience. If we do, and I haven't had it tested, but I just use the formula that I'm comfortable with and seems to be successful. So temperature again is an important ingredient, particularly here in Maricopa. The best growing is really between 70 and 90 degrees. It's getting a little bit colder now, so I've got a little exposure there with my plants. Probably the thing that happens too is once our temperature gets 90 and above, the pollen isn't effective anymore. And so if you have tomato plants that have set and started to grow and it gets over 9 degrees, that's fine. It'll continue to grow. But if it hasn't set, one of the things that I do, which I don't know how important it is I'll kind of shake the tomato plant occasionally. Some people use a toothbrush to try and self-pollinate. And maybe I could increase my yield if I was a little more dedicated to self-pollination. But it probably does help if you at least do some simple self-pollination occasionally with tomato plants. And again, with indeterminate plants, because they literally can just expand and grow. And part of the problem is if you didn't do anything in terms of staking, then they're going to break off. You're not going to get the same yield. So it's important to trim and to stake. Now, you've probably seen the wire supports at the big box stores and that you can set and have the tomatoes grow up somewhat contained. They're still going to probably grow out of it. I don't bother with that because I like to kind of trim and I'll tie them against the wire that for the structure that I have inside. So either way, it's really important to try and because usually they'll go almost up 6 feet, which is the kind of the cage that I have. When to pick? Well, you can do it pretty much anytime that you want. Like I say, ideally you'd leave it on the vine until they're red and you're ready to harvest. But also if you have slight pinkish, if you don't have some kind of cage, and you can get simple cages too, you don't have to build something as big as I did. But once they turn a little bit pink, you're going to probably have the birds attacking you. You can ripen them off the vine. I didn't. Yeah.
I was going to say a couple to don't. I do box gardens, so I built my own gardens. And to try to protect from the birds, I used some PVC and just ran it over and then put some netting over it. But a couple things I didn't take into consideration is the tomato plants get much higher than what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You know, I did it so it was up maybe 3 feet or so they were right up against the top of the net. And the birds, you know, we had two plants of cherry tomatoes that were really came in nice. And in the span of about 30 seconds, they just got on the net and just destroyed everything that was on the top layer. So
yeah, well, and again, you could of course trim it back. And I wouldn't mind if the birds ate the whole tomato, but it's so annoying when they just kind of destroy it. Exactly.
The other thing I was going to say is just as a reminder too that our direct sunlight, I think I've talked about it in Phoenix, is not the direct sunlight. So it's a lot of our plants, if you buy them from the nursery, if you buy the transplants especially, they'll say direct sunlight. It's not the same as here. So I traditionally, I think you're on the side of your house also. So I use the sides of the house for my box gardens. They get 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, but it's never that intense direct sunlight, except for maybe a couple hours as the sun passes over. And that's really helped me. I used to put them more towards the back of the house. And
and I wouldn't plant the transplants in direct sun. I would either do it, you know, fairly early in the morning or late afternoon, because otherwise you can really stress the plants. So I bring in 100 tomatoes to my wife. She calms down after a few minutes. And, you know, obviously you're all familiar with, she likes to make salsa, soups, and sauces, and either freezes it or cans it. You have to be a little more careful with canning tomatoes, but probably part of the enjoyment is she'll take the most beautiful tomatoes and make a basket and deliver it to the neighbors and people, and they seem to enjoy it. In fact, we had a little girl, I guess she was in a family, I don't know, she was maybe 4 or 5, and she just loved my tomatoes. She told her mother, so I'd always take her special tomatoes. So yeah.
One of the things when you talk about hundreds of tomatoes, and I learned this just from even buying in the small little plants I've had for freezing. You can just pick the tomato red, throw it in a freezer bag. And what I do with ones that are even starting to get a little mushy,
And then if I'm making soups or whatever, I take them and I throw them in a blender and I blend them so they're blended, added. And I also do that with other vegetables. So freezing works really well because tomatoes have C, so you don't have to worry about them turning.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's just a hint.
There's a lot of good hints out there. These were just my potatoes I grew. So a couple of different ways that, yeah.
You said they have seeds so they don't turn, what is that?
No, I
mean?
said they have vitamin C,
Oh,
so they
vitamin C.
don't turn. So I just throw them
Yeah.
in.
Oh,
Just
okay.
whole.
Yeah.
So I can ask a quick question on
Yeah.
the potatoes. If you
Sure.
saw the picture.
Yeah.
So we did potatoes over the fall
Mhm.
and had good success with them. And then next year, everything I read said replace all the soil on the potatoes because we weren't going to use it for potatoes. We were going to use it for something else.
Mhm.
So is that your experience too?
I only did one season,
Okay.
so I was
That's
just,
what we did too.
yeah, I was just curious about, not being in Idaho. I didn't even think that about growing potatoes here in this area, but they turned out. So, and they're kind of neat to scoop them up in all these tubulars, and and it even tasted good. So I don't know.
I know and everything grew after that, but everything I read said if you've grown potatoes in the soil, get rid of the soil. After that, start over. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's for potatoes too, or just.
Well, I don't know. Well, one of the things about square foot gardening, and particularly with the Earthbox, is you don't have to replace your growing medium every year. Now, the Earthbox, what you do is once you're through with growing, is you want to take out the fertilizer that you had in there, and you know where it is because of the plant, and just dig that out, because otherwise it can't think of the word. Anyway, you want to take it out, otherwise it provides too much, whatever it is. What was that?
Nitrogen?
No, too much.
Because it gets really hot, right?
Yeah,
Ammonia?
no. Well, I don't know. But anyway, you should take out, at least in the,
How do you separate that out?
well, because like for the potatoes, I put the fertilizer in a row, just a deep row here, the 1 pound. And so I know where it is. I mean, you're not going to get it exact, but you're going to get the bulk of it out. And what I do is I just throw it around the trees and in the backyard, give them a little bit of, but my wife, a lot of times she'll actually put it, cut them and put them in trays and put them in the oven and cook them. And then when she brings them out, then she'll use a food mill to better refine, I guess. That way, she doesn't have to peel them or anything like that. But also, she'll cook them for soups and salsa and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different ways of utilizing these hundreds of tomatoes that you're going to have.
Oh, the question is
Yeah.
on when you were saying how the birds will attack, they turn pink, and you have various stages of ripening, all the way to vine ripen. Does it affect the taste of the tomato, the quality of it?
Well, I say it doesn't. Other people say it does. I think, to me, it's psychological if you think it tastes better. I don't know. But I just get the enjoyment of growing them, and I enjoy eating it. So I think it's sort of a personal taste type thing. Okay.
Homegrown tomato is better than store-bought.
Okay, there you got the expert there. Okay.
Well, my grandma and my grandpa back from Iowa always had a big garden. It was probably close to an acre, and they grew everything. Corn, tomatoes, cucumbers, radishes, carrots, and nothing tastes out of the store like a store carrot, because they're you go in the ground. It's too completely different. I would just love to do that.
Yeah.
I would go, I'd pick, radishes, carrots, and walk down to the river to fish and pick apples off the trees as I went down there, and it just doesn't compare.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true.
But they
The
never changed the soil. They grew potatoes too.
well, but I'm sure they put fertilizer, whether
I
it's
would just
yeah,
use it, so it's everything's already
Yeah.
done. They would have it, plowed,
yeah,
but I don't. But I didn't know whether they actually added to the soil.
yeah. I'm sure they did. Probably manure, and chicken manure, cow manure, all that, the good stuff. So, any questions?
Have you ever tried growing from the hanging? Those hanging.
I haven't tried it. I've obviously seen it, in the stores and that to sell. I don't know why it wouldn't work, but I'd just rather have a lot.
So, question on insects. I grew a garden. I was probably about 14, 15 years old in my backyard here.
Mhm.
And I grew everything. I had rows that were probably about from here to the wall, lettuce and tomatoes and carrots, and everything went along really good. And as things ripened, all of a sudden the insects, they literally attacked, and within a short period of time, I just went like, I went out and harvested everything and had one more salad, and that was about it.
Yeah, I harvested some cauliflower once, and I think it was pretty sure it was cauliflower. Took it in the house. My wife started preparing it, and these little worms started crawling out from,
But is there what's the method that can?
There's a lot of insecticides and things. I have not. The only time I've used it a little bit was on some cabbage where there were holes and things, and I thought, well, I'm going to dust it a little bit with 7. But I'm just not a big believer in using.
There's some organic stuff.
Yeah.
We use a lot of organic stuff. Not in kind of right now, but for our tomato plants and
Mhm.
for broccoli, and for,
Yeah.
cauliflower, and dust all the leaves.
Yeah.
The bugs start getting coming up. You get those huge green caterpillars.
Mm-hmm.
That turn into this
Tomato
massive
worms.
moth, and they just blend right in. So you really have to look for them. You don't, they'll escape.
Yeah.
So we'll dust it and they go away.
Yeah. You don't eat them.
No.
Oh, okay.
The protein is probably fine.
Yeah.
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 And I looked at the website that when you sent out,
Mhm.
and we were setting this up originally, I looked at the website for
Mhm.
these things, and they have netting for birds, one for
Yeah.
insects, so there's like different thicknesses and stuff, so.
Yeah.
I'm
There's.
sure you can buy stuff that.
Yeah.
Stuff too, but-
One other important thing about tomatoes is make sure that you keep so that the air can circulate. You may need to continue trimming at least the bottom part after they've grown to some extent, because that really is important too. Yeah.
I've also read that you can plant pungent plants in your garden like marigolds.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that? And the other thing that we do just for the plants around in our backyard is hummingbird feeder.
We do the same thing. We have honey.
Because they love bugs.
And we do marigold in the center.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we've got a couple of hummingbirds that in our backyard, but I think they're not comfortable trying to squeeze through the netting and that.
Well,
But
we have 2 in the back and 1 in the front, and I have a beautiful flower garden in front and then a mixed garden in the back, and I have had over 5 years very little bugs. So
well, I think they're fascinating birds. They come right up to you and just sort of hover. It's like they want to talk to you.
especially if your
Yeah.
feeder's empty.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly enjoyed the opportunity, and I wish you happy gardening. And
What do
you know.
do? You get those squash bugs on the little bugs, they like squash plants.
No,
Oh, they're horrible.
really.
Just horrible. I think they call them squash
We
bugs.
addressed it for those two. We grow a lot of squash.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, squash grows great here, by the way.
Uh,
Yeah, it really does.
I think it was last year, they just were everywhere.
Yeah, we just.
They just say they want them off, it's like, no, no, I don't do
The
that.
miracles, yeah, the miracles, I don't know why. but they
Yeah,
do them,
okay,
but,
I like marigolds.
we just do marigolds in we'll do a couple of marigolds in the center of all of our boxes. And that's my wife. discovered that.
Oh, wow. I heard basil too sometimes.
I
A
think
lot of
everything
herbs you can put in there. they won't die.
pungent,
Mhm.
you know,
Next to the tomato plants.
Rosemary, you know, when you mix.